Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are opening a fascinating box of historical mystery that smells very distinctly of 19th century mischief and acid-etched brass. We are talking about the Kinderhook plates.
6 small, bell-shaped pieces of metal, right. And they're covered in these bizarre, unknown characters, reportedly unearthed in Illinois back in 1843. But the real puzzle here isn't the artifact itself, it's the timeline of deception, belief, and then eventual scientific certainty that surrounds it.
Were these genuine ancient artifacts? Were they something that supported a prophet's claims about finding metal plates in American soil? Or were they a sophisticated, elaborate forgery designed explicitly and, well, quite successfully to test those very claims?
Our sources, they let us map a really complex 140-year timeline. It starts with the moment of discovery and Joseph Smith's immediate recorded reaction. Then we move through the later confessions of the conspirators, the decades the plates were fiercely defended as authentic scripture by a major institution, and then finally, the scientific proof that definitively closed the debate.
So our mission today is simple. We want to unpack what this single historical episode, the story of the Kinderhook plates, what it reveals about translation claims, the pitfalls of historical editing, and crucially, about institutional credibility when it's faced with, well, overwhelming conflicting evidence. Okay, let's unpack this timeline. We begin in April 1843, near the small town of Kinderhook, Illinois.
Right.
The official story is that a group of men, 9 of them, were digging into a Native American burial mound, driven by, local curiosity.
And that digging yielded quite the dramatic find on April 23rd. They found 3 things: human remains, a box carved from stone, and inside that box, 6 small plates bound together by iron rings.
The human remains are almost as legendary as the plates themselves.
Oh, yeah.
The reports about the skeleton found alongside the plates, they varied wildly. They often suggested it was the remains of a giant.
Some accounts insisted they had unearthed a 9-foot-tall skeleton, buried 6 feet deep.
That kind of colorful exaggeration is important, isn't it?
Okay.
Because it sets the immediate tone.
It does. This wasn't just some quiet historical find. It was a sensational archaeological discovery, tailor-made to ignite the imaginations of the faithful. People who already believed that the American continent was, covered in the buried records of ancient people.
And the men who orchestrated this, W.P. Harris and Wilbur Fugate, among others, they knew exactly where to take their spectacular find.
Straight to Nauvoo, to Joseph Smith, the man already renowned for his translation work on the Book of Mormon and the Book of Abraham, both supposedly from ancient records.
This is where we stop thinking of it as archaeology and start thinking of it as espionage.
Absolutely. Both Harris and Fugate, they later confessed, Harris in 1855, Fugate in 1879, that they were the masterminds of a deliberate hoax. They made the plates themselves.
How technically elaborate was this forgery? I mean, we're talking about pre-Civil War America.
Yeah.
This wasn't mass production.
The confessions actually provide fascinating detail. They claim they used a combination of copper or brass, which they cut into that distinct bell shape. Then they used beeswax to coat the surface. After that, they scratched the strange characters into the wax, and finally used acid to etch the characters permanently into the metal.
That's a sophisticated method for a 19th century prank. It takes time, effort. This was not a casual forgery.
Not at all. And the motive, according to Fugate, was explicit. It was a joke, yes, but more importantly, it was a translation trap. Fugate claimed they specifically aimed to prove the prophecy that truth is yet to spring up out of the earth. They wanted to see if Joseph Smith,
If he'd fall for it.
if he would fall for their obvious trap, having made his claims on other plates.
So the trap was sprung. The plates arrived in Nauvoo, and the reaction from the Latter-day Saints was exactly what the hoaxers hoped for.
Huge enthusiasm.
They saw the discovery of more metal plates as immediate physical proof supporting the authenticity of the Book of Mormon.
And this excitement was almost instantly channeled into an official response. We have immediate, crucial documentation of Joseph Smith's initial reaction thanks to his private secretary, William Clayton.
Clayton's journal entry, dated May 1st, 1843, is the central document here. He recorded that President Joseph has translated a portion of the plates.
And that's not a vague promise of future work. It was a firm present tense claim of a partial translation.
And that partial translation gave specific, theologically loaded details. Clayton wrote that the plates contained the history of the person with whom they were found.
Right, and it specifically identified this individual as a descendant of Ham through the loins of Pharaoh, king of Egypt.
Let's just pause on that claim for a second. Why is the mention of Ham and Pharaoh so important here? It sounds strangely specific.
It's extremely specific because it directly connected this new discovery to Smith's existing scriptural projects.
Ah, the Book of Abraham.
Exactly, the Book of Abraham, which he was working on, and which dealt heavily with Egyptian themes, cosmology, and the lineage of Ham. It wasn't just ancient history, it was theological history that validated his current scriptural framework.
And that connection was immediately seized upon by other leaders, too. Parley P. Pratt later wrote that the plates contained the genealogy of one of the ancient Jaredites back to Ham, the son of Noah.
So he's explicitly linking the discovery not just to Egyptian texts, but to the foundational Book of Mormon narrative itself.
The expectation was massive. The church paper, the Nauvoo Neighbor, published exact facsimiles of these plates.
And they announced the contents would be published in Times and Seasons once the translation was completed.
So the public expectation was set. A new, maybe 1,200-page book of scripture was on the way.
But that complete translation never materialized. After all that fanfare, the trail just goes cold.
Which brings us to the core mystery of this deep dive.
Yeah.
Why would a prophet, under intense public scrutiny, with massive community enthusiasm, just stop translating a scripture that supposedly validates his entire calling?
Well, we have to explore the ambiguity in the sources about his translation method. Was he attempting a sacred, revelatory translation?
Or was it something else?
Or was this a more secular, scholarly attempt? The evidence, surprisingly, points toward the latter.
You see evidence of a scholarly pursuit.
Absolutely. Joseph Smith's own journal from May 7, 1843, records that shortly after receiving the plates, he sent for his Hebrew Bible and lexicon.
Okay, so if you were expecting an immediate revelation from God, you don't typically send for a Hebrew dictionary.
Precisely. That suggests he was attempting a comparison, maybe trying to decipher the characters himself.
And this is where the modern analysis hits the aha moment.
It really is. We have an anonymous eyewitness who wrote that Joseph compared them in my presence with his Egyptian alphabet and concluded that the characters were evidently the same as those he had previously studied.
The Egyptian alphabet. We know that resource. That is almost certainly a reference to the grammar and alphabet of the Egyptian language, or GAEL. Now, for you, the listener, it's vital to understand what the GAL was.
Right. The JAL was not a revealed scripture. It was a scholarly, if flawed, resource compiled by Joseph Smith and his associates in 1835. It was part of their effort to translate the Book of Abraham papyri. It represented an attempt to manually assign meanings to Egyptian characters.
So he took the Kinderhook plates, pulled out his self-made Egyptian dictionary, and tried to manually match the strange characters. But how could matching just one character give William Clayton an entire history of a descendant of Ham and Pharaoh? That sounds like a gross overextrapolation.
It is, but that is the core finding of modern scholars. The partial translation that William Clayton recorded aligns perfectly with the content assigned to a single boat-shaped Egyptian character that appears in the GAL document.
A single character.
A single character. The GAL assigned massive sweeping historical narratives to single symbols.
No, he didn't translate the plates. He translated one symbol he thought he recognized. He used his own existing non-revelatory document to give it a gigantic historical context, and then publicly announced that context as a partial translation of the entire set.
That appears to be the most accurate interpretation of the evidence. It places the episode firmly into a scholarly pursuit that used flawed manual resources.
Not a sacred revelatory process.
Exactly. He was applying his existing academic methodology.
Which raises the question again, why the silence afterward? The community thought a 1,200-page book was imminent. Why no follow-through, no publication, no transcription?
There are a few possibilities, and each is supported by some historical documentation. First, the possibility of the stupor of thought.
The spiritual equivalent of writer's block.
Basically. Perhaps he genuinely sought revelation but received none.
Or, and this is where the conspirators come back in, perhaps he grew suspicious. To denounce the plates as fake, however, would be incredibly risky for him.
He couldn't denounce them outright. His entire prophetic narrative was predicated on the discovery and translation of ancient metal plates covered in reformed Egyptian characters.
Right. Denouncing the Kinderhook plates would create a massive logical gap in his own claims.
And we even have evidence that he was stalling. The hoaxer, if you get, claimed that Joseph would not agree to translate them until they were sent off for verification by international antiquarian societies.
That's a genius maneuver. It's a delay tactic that lets him save face, either waiting for the fraud to be exposed elsewhere or simply letting the excitement die down naturally.
So whether he suspected fraud or the revelatory process failed, the fact remains the process stopped. The conspirator's trap was only partially sprung. Smith had made the initial claim, but he hadn't committed the translation to print.
And here is where the institutional saga truly begins, stretching across a century and a half. The plates themselves were eventually lost, but the official narrative, it did not stop.
No, it doubled down on their authenticity.
For over 100 years.
The institution maintained that the plates were genuine, and conversely, they argued that the confessions of the hoaxers Fugate and Harris were the real hoax.
What's fascinating is how long they maintained this position. It was generations of sustained defense.
Absolutely. As early as 1895, prominent church historian B.H. Roberts attacked Fugate's confession. He used the argument that the 36-year delay in confessing proved Fugate was lying.
So they tried to discredit the source of the fraud rather than question the artifact itself.
Exactly. And this belief was promoted well into the 20th century. In 1962, the church's improvement era claimed the plate's discovery reaffirms his prophetic calling.
And even in 1979, an apostle, Mark E. Peterson, claimed publicly that most experts agree they are of ancient vintage. This was a foundational piece of institutional history.
What is particularly crucial to analyze in our source material is the editorial handling of the original documents during this long defense.
You mean William Clayton's journal?
Remember his journal entry, which read in the third person? President J has translated a portion.
Yes, that was changed when it was published in the History of the Church in 1909.
The third-person account was replaced with the first person. I have translated a portion. The official justification was that this was standard 19th century biographical practice to make the history read in the prophet's own words.
But the implication of that change is profound.
It is. By changing it to I have translated, the institutional history cemented the idea for later generations that Joseph Smith was the direct, unwavering author of that claim. It made it harder for future historians or apologists to argue he was merely speculating or quoting someone else. It elevated an initial, tentative claim into a definitive historical statement.
It blurred the line between what a private secretary wrote and what the prophet definitively stated.
And this sustained defense only ended because the evidence finally became truly undeniable. It moved from historical debate to laboratory analysis.
In 1980, the Chicago Historical Society, which possessed the one surviving Kinderhook plate, finally allowed a proper forensic and chemical analysis.
And this put the matter to rest scientifically.
The testing was absolutely conclusive.
Without a doubt. The analysis proved that the plate was a 19th century fabrication, confirming the hoaxer's 1879 account. The experts found the metal composition, the dimensions, and the specific workmanship to be consistent with the facilities of an 1843 blacksmith shop.
A modern forgery, proven by modern science. So after 140 years of the official history promoting the plates as genuine proof of the prophet's gift, how did the institution pivot? That must have been a painful historical correction.
The pivot was immediate, dramatic, and strategically cautious. It was published in the church's Ensign magazine in August 1981, confirming that the Kinderhook plates were indeed a 19th century hoax.
But the minimization starts immediately.
Exactly. The article sought to distance the prophet from the event. It argued that there was no evidence he pursued the matter further or that he took up the matter with the Lord.
The argument became he was merely presented with the plates, maybe speculated, and then dropped it.
But that position is directly contradicted by this 140 years of official history we just reviewed. The history which promoted the partial translation as credible and had included the edited first-person version of the statement in its foundational texts.
The plates were only dropped once science forced the issue.
And so the Kinderhook episode becomes a textbook case study on institutional honesty and historical editing. It highlights the conflict between what an institution needs to believe for its ongoing narrative
And what the verifiable historical and scientific facts ultimately reveal. It seems like we have two major conflicts defined by the Kinderhook plates. First, the initial conflict between the hoaxer's design and the prophet's initial recorded claim.
And second, the century-long conflict between institutional history and the eventual undeniable scientific proof.
It really stands as a pivotal case study for anyone evaluating Joseph Smith's claims to ancient language translation. We have the source material, we have the claim that a portion was translated.
And we now have the definitive proof that the source material was a fabrication. The story raises serious questions about discernment, both for the individual in 1843 and for the historians who defended the artifact long past the point of reasonable doubt.
And here's where it gets really interesting for you to consider. The Kinderhook plates were proven a modern fraud, created with beeswax and acid. And Joseph Smith's initial description of the content appears to have relied on matching a single character to the grammar and alphabet of the Egyptian language, the Gael.
A secular, non-revelatory text created by Smith and his associates during the Book of Abraham process.
So given that the plates were fake, and the partial translation failed using the Gael, what does the failure of this one scholarly attempt suggest about the reliability of the entire Gael document and the translation process for the Book of Abraham itself? Something for you to mull over as you consider the intersection of faith, forgery, and history.